China's number two in name only just lied about the GDP being 5.2% in growth. Yet Chinese stock market responded with a drop across the board. And data on export jobs and consumption just doesn't paint the picture of a 5%. So China's lying again. Surprise, surprise. Let's talk about this. Meanwhile, Chinese scientists made a coronavirus that 100% kills humanized mice. Here we go again. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. China's premier in name only without real power, Li Chang, he went to Davos for the World Economic Forum, and there he says that China's 2023 growth was 5.2%. Now, this number sounds like something that came out of a fairy tale, because if you've been watching China news for the last year, you would know that the reality is probably the opposite. Of course, this was an attempt to sell that China is open for business to Western investors again, especially at a place like the WEF. Rhodium Group, however, they do a lot of research on China, think that the actual growth for 2023 was more like 1.5%. In my view, Rhodium is even overestimating their growth. I think it was negative. Unless we're all as blind as the top echelon of the Chinese Communist Party, China is in recession as well as it's in deflation, which is a much bigger problem than inflation. But outside of that, three of China's so-called golden chariots of industry that has propped up its economy for the years since include consumption, manufacturing, and export, as well as the real estate, are all down. Now, against that backdrop, is China's growth really 5.2%? Well, they say that the market doesn't lie. While Li Chang was at Davos giving that speech about the 5.2% growth, China and Hong Kong stock market indexes, they've all dropped points across the board. Now, this, of course, is a big propaganda point for the state media, but in a video that was published about this so-called 5.2%, all the comments were being satirical and essentially questioning the math that officials put out for how they got to 5.2% growth. So I'll read you some of the examples. I think they're really fun and making fun of the bizarre math from the CCP. One of them says, I'm planting sugar oranges and made 1 billion yuan this year, cat face. One more says, I sold fridge in Northeast China and made mad banks, 5 billion yuan. Well, another one says, I made 70,000 in a month doing labor in Chengdu city, thumbs up. Well, another says, I didn't make as much as them, but I picked up bottles and only made a few million yuan. One more says, one day I make 100 yuan, 1 month I make 10,000 yuan, in a year I'll make 3.65 million yuan. This one's my favorite, okay? It says, my kindergarten son made 20,000 in a month and more than 300,000 in a year. Chinese internet users are coming up with really smart ways to make fun of the government, and these are some really next level comments in my view. Now they had the audacity to republish unemployment rate in China, which was something that they stopped doing back in June of 2023 because it hit 21.3%, and that was really embarrassing for the regime to be publicly telling people, and so now they're redoing it, but the numbers went down to 14.9% for the age of 16 to 24, and we all know that the percentage in all these things in China, they're not really calculated based on what's actually happening in the economy, but rather it's based on the political needs, so they adjusted it based on whatever is being ordered to. Now, this was for the age of 16 to 24. When they republished it for December of 2023, they actually removed a huge amount of the population from that age group, which they say are students. Now, the excuse that they gave is that students' main job is to study and not work. However, we all know that students under the age of 18 usually do study anyways. So the high unemployment rate comes not from the lower end of that age group, but rather the higher end, which are people from 20 to 24. Now, in China, most university or college graduates are in the age of 22 to 23. So that means a huge portion of them are actually without jobs after graduation. So what the regime actually did is remove about 62 million people from that age group, which then allowed them to drop the number down to about 15% or so. And this pressure is mounting because every year China has about 10 million new graduates. And so imagine in the last 3 years, you had the pandemic and the job market is terrible. That number is obviously increasing. So you're not really looking at those who are still in school, but rather those that have graduated. And this story is very interesting because low wage and unemployment has been a large issue in the recent months, especially in Chinese media. Now, there are two publications, one called Caixin and another one called Yicai. They're basically like the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal of China. They both have simultaneous simultaneously published editorial pieces criticizing the government's handling of low-wage earners and people who are making basic income in China, or even lower than that. And they say that there's a huge number of people in China that's actually not even making the ends meet. And so what happened to those articles? Well, obviously they were forced to delete it. And then the officials came out with a propaganda video which says a delivery driver for Meituan was able to make $1,000,000 in 3 years. Clearly, this is not what the experience of many people in China are like. Nobody's making $1,000,000. And so people started doing the math and calculating his work hours and his delivery. And it turned out now the story is that he signed a special contract with Meituan to basically deliver as many orders as possible. And so he's basically being portrayed as a model for the industry to be used to propagandize so-called a bright future in food delivery. And with that, they've also done propaganda videos featuring a young man who works as a construction worker, and he makes about 2,000 yuan a day, which is a lot for the job, as well as another who picks garbage for a living, and he made 200,000 a year. Of course, that's in Chinese yuan. And so that's like saying you can pick garbage and make the same amount of money as a doctor or engineer in China. We know that in no country is it possible to work a minimum wage job and make the same amount as a doctor or an engineer. Now, speaking of population, this is the second piece of information that would give us a good indication into the Chinese economy. China's population, and of course, they've been faking the numbers ever since the beginning of the regime, but the latest information says that China's birth rate has dropped 5.6% to 9.02 million. Information suggests a decrease of 2.08 million people compared to the same time last year. So the numbers might not seem that big in the grander scheme of things, but when you combine it with these things, for example, the lack of birthing rate, the lack of will to have kids, and what China went through, which is 3 years of the pandemic, right? It's a scary trend because this is the beginning of a downhill slope. What usually happens, according to experts on China's population, is that they will overcount birth rate and undercount death rate. So based on number of data for the first quarter of 2023 in Zhejiang province, it showed that the number of cremated remains listed in the funeral service column was 171,000. And that's a year-on-year increase of nearly 73%, which is, of course, much higher than the previous year of 90,000, the death of COVID alone. And this is, again, not accounting for the overall number of deaths, which China has continued to hide for the actual death in China over the 3 years of the pandemic. So 73%, if we were to extrapolate that to a national level, if 73% in one province, then across China, we can, of course, see tens of millions of excessive death because of COVID. And that number is probably higher than the official published 2.08 million death. So of course, we know that the real population of China is way below 1.4 billion. And because of the 3 years of the pandemic, I'm guessing it's somewhere below 1 billion. And the biggest problem with the distorted demographic is that the decision-making on the actual population number is severely hindered by the fake numbers. So we'll continue to see signs of population drop. Because this also is a fundamental issue, right? China's population is not only decreasing, but it is also aging. So when you have an aging population, your workforce can actually meet its demand for providing the manufacturing, exports, and whatnot. And plus, this is just one aspect of many issues, which we'll continue to talk about. Right now, China is in a situation of deflation while the rest of the world is in inflation. With deflation, it is much harder to get out of it. Even though price of goods are cheaper, it's the lack of consumption that really creates this situation, much like Japan had back in the days. And so while you're in deflation, even though the price of things are cheap, nobody's actually buying it. This extends into the likes of the real estate industry, general investments, even into buying a little bit of bigger items such as a car or even purchasing large appliances. People are more careful with spending money. So savings in China is at an all-time high, but spending is at an all-time low. So let's talk more concrete numbers. When Li Chang spoke at Davos, his reaction was immediately met with multiple stock indexes across China dropping points. And so, for example, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is down negative 10.4% in the first 17 days of 2024. And this graph paints an even more staggering picture here. The Hong Kong Hang Seng Index will be at the same price it was 30 years ago if another 16-point drops were to take place. And given the current trend, it's looking dangerously close to another drop, which would mean that China's economy, in a sense, would essentially revert to 30 years ago. And the Nasdaq China index also plunged 4% on the day that he spoke. And the most telling is the benchmark Shanghai Composite Index, which has been, in this campaign to defend its 2,900 point threshold, which has been broken multiple times now. Recently, it was down by 2.09% to 2833. And of course, we're soon going to be seeing a 2,800 points defense campaign, which by then will be even more scary than now. And Beijing's answer is to force its investors to not sell off the stocks. And of course, this is from the Financial Times. And it reads, China's authorities have in recent days told some institutional investors not to sell stocks as regulators face renewed pressure to stabilize share prices following the steep decline in the first weeks of the new year. And yeah, so much for the 5.2% growth. And this also comes as export in China also fell for the first time in 7 years as well. So you have the three golden chariots, right? The real estate, obviously, that's in a terrible state right now. Export is down, consumption is down, and then you have a reflection in the stock market as well. So none of the concrete information that we can see suggest a growth. Okay, let's talk about our second topic. So according to the Daily Mail, Beijing University of Chemical Technology in 2017 worked on an extracted coronavirus from pangolins that they obtained from Malaysia, which were able to kill humanized mice. So these mice died, there's a 100% death rate. The researchers say that this is the first report showing that a SARS-CoV-2 related pangolin coronavirus can cause 100% mortality in HACE2 mice, suggesting a risk for GXP2V to spill over into humans. So you might be questioning, why is China doing another research like this? Well, this was conducted back in 2017. Before 2019, China was in full swing in doing dangerous gain-of-function researches, and so this is just one of them. And of course, we know that the 2019 SARS-CoV-2 was one that essentially gained recognition for infecting the world. But many of these universities, they still, to this day, continue to work on gain-of-function research because it is to their own benefit. If they work on something successfully, they get recognition, they get funding, and they get noticed by the military and the government. But things like this will continue to happen because there simply is no moral bottom line for Chinese researchers there's no restrictions on them stopping. And according to experts on Twitter, as well as those interviewed by the Daily Mail, for example, this one here says, it's a terrible study, scientifically totally pointless. I can see nothing of vague interest that could be learned from force infecting a weird breed of humanized mice with a random virus. Conversely, I could see how such stuff might go wrong. Of course, while we haven't gotten to an outbreak with this yet, but it just tells us another line that what took place in Wuhan across multiple areas of China in different universities, they're all doing this and they will probably never stop. All right, that's it today for the episode on China's 5.2% growth. Is it real? Is it fake? I tell you all of the information available and you can decide. If you enjoy the content, leave a like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, bye-bye.